billionaire is forced to marry and chooses a humble maid for a shocking reason. Before we start, leave a comment saying where you're watching from. I love knowing how far our stories are reaching. And if you enjoy love stories full of emotion, overcoming obstacles, and happy endings, subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any content, and you'll also help this space keep growing. The late afternoon sun filtered through the old stained glass windows of the Ellison mansion, coloring the main hall with golden and melancholic tones. Nathaniel Nate Ellison was seated in the dark leather armchair, his hands clasped, eyes fixed on the legal document resting on the mahogany table. The family lawyer, a gray-haired man with an impenetrable expression, was finishing the reading of the will in a grave tone that seemed to weigh tons on Nate's shoulders. The condition is clear, Mr. Ellison. To officially take over the presidency of the hotel group, you must marry before the end of this fiscal year. Nate raised his eyes, incredulous. His grayish-blue gaze, so accustomed to the coldness of business negotiations, now trembled with a vulnerability he had hidden for years. This is absurd, he exclaimed, standing up abruptly, his voice echoing through the silent hall. The lawyer remained impassive. It was your grandfather's wish, sir. It is recorded, validated, and impossible to contest. Nate ran his hand through his dark blonde hair, always impeccably combed, now disheveled by the impulsive gesture. He walked to the window, looking at the vast garden that stretched to the horizon, where the old trees swayed gently in Charleston's humid breeze. Since childhood, he had grown up within those opulent walls, surrounded by a strict upbringing and values that prioritized image and power above all else. He had never allowed himself any weaknesses, much less distractions like love, my grandfather, always manipulating, even after death, he murmured with a bitter smile. He knew I'd never marry out of obligation. The lawyer cleared, his throat discreetly, as someone needing to end the conversation, but knowing it wouldn't stop there. You have 6 months, sir. Otherwise, the presidency will automatically transfer to your cousin, Gregory. Upon hearing the name, Nate closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Gregory Ellison was exactly what the family always avoided admitting: greedy, dishonest, and completely incapable of leading the business. Letting him take over would not only mean watching decades of family tradition collapse, but also exposing the group's thousands of employees to a cruel and ruthless management. Gregory can't. He'd destroy everything, Nate whispered, more to himself than to the lawyer. He stood there for a few seconds, staring at the sky that was starting to turn lilac, his head pounding in the face of that unexpected crossroads. It's not about love, is it? He asked with bitter irony, turning to the lawyer. It's about legacy, sir. Those words sounded like a sentence. Nate sank back into the armchair, rubbing his temples. For the first time in years, he didn't have an immediate answer, nor a ready-made strategy. His gaze drifted across the vast hall, where ancestral portraits of the Ellisons stared at him with superiority. Men and women from past generations, all married, all keeping the family name above any personal desire. Nate's hand clenched tightly over the arm of the chair. They want me to marry. Then I will marry, but with whoever I choose. The lawyer tilted his head slightly, showing no reaction. Nate stood up once more, with a determined air, though the anguish still gnawed at him inside. He walked to the unlit fireplace, where an old photograph showed him as a child beside his grandfather, a man with a hard gaze and a forced smile. You won, you stubborn old man, he whispered. But deep down, Nate knew he wasn't just fighting a legal clause. He was fighting his entire history, his family, and above all, himself. As the mansion's clock struck 6 o'clock sharp, the church bells in the distance began to toll, silently marking the start of a journey that would change his life forever. And at that very moment, miles away, a young woman named Valentina Reyes was quietly finishing yet another exhausting shift as a maid, without even imagining that her fate had just become entwined with the most powerful man in Charleston. While the distant church bells echoed, Nate stood motionless in front of the unlit fireplace, his gaze fixed on the old photograph with his grandfather. The reflection of the golden frame flickered softly under the yellowish light of the crystal chandelier, as if even time itself hesitated before that decision that seemed irrevocable. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain the avalanche of feelings overwhelming him: anger, fear, frustration, and above all, an immense emptiness. So, this is it. His voice was low, hoarse, almost a whisper lost in the vast, silent hall. The lawyer, still positioned near the mahogany table, broke the silence with a professional tone, though filled with restrained compassion. "It's a difficult decision, Mr. Ellison, but necessary. Your grandfather believed that marriage would be the final step in shaping not only the businessman, but the man you should become." Nate let out a brief, bitter laugh as he turned his face to the side, hiding an involuntary glimmer in his grayish-blue eyes. "He never believed I was capable on my own. He always needed to set some trap to force me into his mold." The lawyer took a deep breath, adjusting his gray tie with a mechanical gesture. He knew Nate needed that moment to vent, like a wounded animal silently aching. "Gregory is ready to take over if you refuse or fail to meet the requirement by December 31st. Hearing his cousin's name, Nate clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Gregory, the polished predator with the easy smile, always lurking, waiting for Nate to slip so he could take everything from him. My grandfather always had a soft spot for him, that cheap charm, the rehearsed words, but he's not prepared at all, just blind ambition." The lawyer, neither confirming nor denying, simply continued, "The deadline is short, sir. If you'd like, I can recommend specialists in prenuptial agreements, contracts." Nate cut him off with an icy stare, slowly walking back to the table. His footsteps echoed across the impeccably polished wooden floor. "Is that how they want me to see marriage? As a clause, a signature on letterhead?" He laid his hands on the table, leaning slightly forward, the muscles in his arms tense under the perfectly fitted white shirt, now with the sleeves slightly rolled up, revealing the classic gold watch. The insistent ticking seemed to mock him. "What if I don't want to get married? What if I just give it all up and leave?" The lawyer raised his eyebrows with the serenity of someone who had seen generations of Ellisons fight similar battles. "Then you will give up the presidency, and Gregory will take over. The decision, as always, is yours." Nate remained still, staring at nothing, as if waiting for his grandfather to step out from the painting on the wall and say that this was just another one of his cruel tests. But there were no more tests. No mercy. He straightened up, took a deep breath, and adjusted the cufflinks of his shirt with the meticulous precision that defined him. "Prepare the necessary documents," he said, his voice suddenly firm, almost like an executive giving orders. "In yet another $1 million negotiation. Of course, should I understand that you will begin the search for a bride?" Nate didn't answer immediately. He just looked away toward the huge stained glass window that faced the garden, now wrapped in the mist, rising from the damp earth after sunset. A thought flashed through his mind like silent lightning. He no longer wanted one of those empty women shaped from the same mold of superficiality like so many he had known. He didn't want a wife manufactured for social column photos and boring dinners. His heart, hardened by the years, whispered that maybe there was another way out. "I will find someone," he said, almost like a promise to himself. The lawyer simply nodded, gathering the papers and preparing to leave. Once alone, Nate sank once again into the leather armchair, his eyes fixed on the ornate ceiling. The silence felt overwhelming. Then he closed his eyes and murmured, as if sealing his own fate, "If they want me to marry, it'll be on my terms." Outside, dry leaves swept across the stone pathways of the garden, carried by the cold wind, while miles away, Valentina Reyes, exhausted after another day of work, walked through the gate of the modest neighborhood where she lived, having no idea that soon her name would forever change the course of Nathaniel Ellison's life. And at that moment, like in every great drama of life, the invisible game of fate had just begun. While Nathaniel Ellison stood alone, staring at the night slowly swallowing up the mansion's gardens miles away, Valentina Reyes gripped tightly the strap of her simple, already worn-out bag as she crossed the rusty iron gate leading into the small, low-income apartment complex where she lived, on the outskirts of Charleston. The smell of jasmine mixed with that of freshly washed clothes hanging on makeshift clotheslines, strung between the connected brick houses, all worn and their paint faded by time. Valentina walked quickly, her maid's uniform still impeccable despite the exhausting hours at the luxurious Ellison Grand Hotel. She climbed the 3 flights of the cracked concrete external staircase, skillfully dodging toys scattered by the neighborhood kids until she reached the wooden door where the number 304 barely held on by a single nail. Before even turning the key, she took a deep breath, preparing for the daily ritual of hiding her own exhaustion and offering her mother and brother the strongest version of herself. "Val," her mother's weak, familiar voice called out as soon as she entered. "I'm home, Mama," she replied, forcing a smile as she dropped her bag onto the old sofa with worn-out upholstery and faded cushions. From the next room, her mother, Maria Reyes, appeared leaning on a cane, her face pale and lined with the wrinkles of suffering, but with a stubborn gleam in her dark eyes. "You're exhausted," her mother murmured, noticing the deep dark circles that cheap concealer could no longer hide. Valentina gave a faint smile and went over to her, gently taking her hand. "Just a little." Today, the presidential suite was a mess. The guests spilled champagne even on the carpet. Her mother let out a weak laugh, which quickly turned into a dry, deep cough. Valentina instinctively supported her. "You should be resting," she whispered, helping her sit down in the armchair covered with an old blanket. "I feel fine," her mother lied, while looking at the black and white photo on the shelf, a picture of the 3 of them, taken years ago when their father was still alive, smiling, hugging Valentina and little Matteo. Valentina walked over to the cramped kitchen, where her younger brother Matteo, only 9 years old, was drawing in a school notebook stained with coffee. "Hi, Val," he said cheerfully, dropping his pencil to hug her. "Hey, champ," she replied, ruffling his light brown, messy hair. She sat beside him, looking at the drawing. A huge hotel with flags and a very visible sign. Ellison Grand Hotel. "See, I drew the hotel where you work," he said proudly. Valentina smiled, but a lump tightened in her throat. The irony of that drawing gnawed at her chest. She spent most of her days cleaning rooms she could never afford, serving people who didn't even look her in the eye. She was like a silent ghost among marble walls and crystal chandeliers. "It's beautiful, love," she said, kissing his forehead. "But you're going to draw even more beautiful places, and you're going to visit all of them." Matteo widened his eyes, curious. "Really? Are we going to travel?" Valentina swallowed hard, keeping her smile. "One day, I promise." She stood up and, while preparing a simple tea for her mother, the thoughts began to pound in her mind. The overdue rent, the medical bills that kept piling up. And now the doctor had been clear. Without proper treatment, her mother's health would only get worse. She leaned against the sink, closing her eyes for a second. Tears threatened to break through the barrier she worked so hard to maintain. Every day, But she took a deep breath, dried her hands on her apron, and returned to her mother's room with the steaming cup. "Thank you, Hija," her mother said, holding the cup with her frail hands. "I'll figure something out, Mama," Valentina whispered, like a silent vow to the universe. "You already do more than enough, my angel." Valentina just smiled, but her gaze drifted out the living room window, where the city lights twinkled in the distance, unreachable like distant stars. Out there somewhere, hotel guests toasted with crystal glasses, unaware of the existence of the maid who changed their sheets and kept their rooms immaculate. And at that exact moment, on the other side of that city divided between luxury and need, the most powerful man in Charleston was deciding that he needed a wife. Unaware, Valentina's silent and invisible life was about to collide, like lightning with his. And when that happened, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, Valentina discreetly pushed the cleaning cart down the silent corridor of the presidential floor of the Ellison Grand Hotel. The air there was different, perfumed with expensive scents and filled with an opulence that would never be part of her life. The thick beige and gold linen curtains muffled even the sound of her restrained footsteps. She stopped in front of Suite 1201, adjusted her white and light blue uniform, pinned her straight, hair even tighter into a bun, and with a silent sigh turned the doorknob. "Room service," she announced softly, just like she always did when entering any of the vacant suites in the morning. But as she gently pushed the door open, she immediately heard the sharp sound of an argument. "You don't understand, Nate. What will people think if we cancel the engagement now?" The shrill voice of a woman filled the space, mixing with the overpowering, cloying perfume that saturated the air. Valentina froze, her hands still resting on the cart, unsure if she should leave or make herself invisible, as she always did. As she turned her head slightly, she saw Nathaniel Ellison standing by the panoramic window, his back to her. He wore a crisp white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing an elegant watch and an athletic build. His tense jaw betrayed his impatience. On the other side, a tall, slender woman with carefully styled, wavy blonde hair, dressed in a red silk robe that screamed vanity, gestured angrily. It was Veronica Blake, the socialite who had graced magazine covers alongside Nate since the engagement announcement. "You're more worried about that ridiculous clause in the will than about me," she raged, digging her perfectly manicured nails into the tanned skin of his arm. Nate pulled away abruptly, running his hand through his hair in exasperation. "Veronica, I already told you it's not going to happen. I'm not going to marry you out of obligation." Valentina, realizing she had intruded on a private moment, quietly backed away, pushing the cart out. But as she brushed lightly against a side table, she accidentally knocked over one of the crystal glasses, which fell onto the thick carpet with a muffled sound. Veronica immediately turned, her green eyes flashing with contempt as she spotted Valentina standing there, paralyzed, her hands clutching the edge of her uniform. "What is this?" the socialite exclaimed, stalking toward her like a predator. "Who let you in here, girl?" Valentina, her face flushed with embarrassment, tried to explain. I thought the suite was vacant, ma'am. I just came to..." "To what? Spy?" Veronica interrupted with a cold laugh, crossing her arms. "Look at this. Another one of those insignificant employees who think they're important just because they clean the floors we walk on." Valentina felt her chest tighten, as if each word was a blade slicing through her dignity. She lowered her gaze, wishing she could disappear. "I'm sorry. I'm leaving now," she said, her voice choked, pushing the cart backward. "Leave her alone, Veronica." Nate's voice cut through the tension, firm and sharp as a knife. Veronica turned, surprised. "What? You're actually defending that?" she asked, pointing at Valentina with disdain. Nate walked over, stopping beside Valentina, who was still, trying to slip away unnoticed. "She's just doing her job, unlike you, who's only here to cause trouble." Valentina looked up, surprised by the unexpected defense. For the first time, She saw up close those grayish-blue eyes that, despite their cold tone, hid a humanity that didn't match the man from the magazines. "You can go back to your work, miss," Nate said in a softer tone, looking at her. "Reyes. Valentina Reyes," she replied almost in a whisper, before quickly pushing the cart and disappearing down the hallway. Nate stood there, watching the door slowly close behind her, while Veronica huffed beside him. "I can't believe you defended. That's enough, Veronica." Nate cut her off, his voice firmer than before. "You have no idea how empty you sounded just now." And without saying anything else, he walked over to the suite's bar, pouring himself a glass of whiskey, while, for the first time, his mind wasn't on the fight, but on that discreet figure with straight dark brown hair and wounded eyes, who seemed to carry a world of silent battles. At that exact moment, without realizing it, Valentina's image etched itself into his memory so intensely that no silk-clad socialite could ever erase it. Outside, Valentina leaned against the hallway wall, squeezing her eyes shut, taking a deep breath to hold back the tears. But what she didn't know was that humiliating encounter would end up being the start of the most unexpected and transformative chapter of her entire life. In the days following the humiliating encounter, Valentina tried hard to forget the episode, burying herself even more in the silent work of cleaning luxurious rooms and making beds she would never sleep in. But with every hallway she walked down, every floor she climbed, it was as if Nathaniel Ellison's intense gaze still followed her, lodged somewhere between her shame and a mix of indignation and surprise. Meanwhile, at the center of Charleston's social headlines, the news exploded violently. Nathaniel Ellison had officially broken off the engagement with Veronica Blake, putting an end to a relationship that, for months, had been considered the event of the year in the city. "He's gone crazy," gossiped the columnists. "He's lost his mind, or is there someone else?" The aristocratic ladies questioned in their cafes. For Nate, the whispers and judgments didn't matter. For the first time, he walked without fear of disappointing others, but with an urgency that consumed him with every passing second. The deadline imposed by the will was approaching, and he needed to make a decision. On a grey Tuesday afternoon, Nate crossed the marble hall of the Ellison Grand Hotel with his usual impeccable and sober posture, but his eyes carried a glint of determination that no one could decipher. He went up to the service floor, where owners rarely set foot. He stopped in front of the support office and with a quick gesture called the manager. "I want to speak with Valentina Reyes," he said, his voice firm and leaving no room for questions. Minutes later, Valentina, dressed in her neat uniform, but with her hands damp from nerves, was led to one of the hotel's private meeting rooms, where she never imagined she would ever set foot. As she opened the door, she found him, Nathaniel, seated at the head of the oak table, fingers clasped over the surface, his face calm, but his piercing eyes analyzing her every movement. "Please sit down," he said, indicating the chair across from him. Valentina hesitated, gripping the edge of her uniform tightly before sitting up straight, like someone bracing for something they didn't yet understand. "Mr. Ellison, if this is about that day, I already apologized. I didn't mean to invade anyone's privacy." Nate raised his hand, cutting her off. "I'm not here because of that." Valentina widened her eyes, confused. "Then, why?" He took a deep breath, resting his elbows on the table, leaning slightly forward. "I'll be direct, Valentina. I need to get married." She furrowed her brow, not immediately understanding. "What do you mean?" "My grandfather left a clause in the will. Without marriage, I lose the company presidency. And honestly, I don't trust anyone in my social circle. Everyone wants something from me." Valentina stayed silent, processing each word. "And what does that have to do with me?" she asked, her voice thick with tension. Nate pressed his lips together as if weighing the gravity of what he was about to propose. "I want you to marry me." The words hung in the air, heavy, surreal, unreal. Valentina let out a nervous laugh, shaking her head. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No." His response came firm, without hesitation. "I want a contractual marriage. No feelings, no personal involvement. You help me meet the requirement, and in return I guarantee your mother's medical treatment and financial stability for your family." Hearing that, Valentina felt the world spin. How did he know about her mother? How do you know? "I have my ways," he replied curtly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Valentina suddenly stood up, her chest heaving with indignation and disbelief. "This is absurd. You think you can just buy a wife like a commodity?" Nate stood up too, approaching her but keeping his tone cold. "I'm not buying anyone, Valentina. I'm offering an opportunity. Don't you want your mother to get better? Don't you want your brother to have a better life?" She felt tears well up in her eyes, but proud, she didn't let them fall. "Not like this," she whispered, stepping back. Nate closed his eyes, running his hand through his hair, frustrated. He had never been rejected, never had to ask twice. "Think about it carefully," he said before she could walk out the door. "I'm not asking for love or commitment, just a contract, nothing more." Valentina paused at the door, gripping the doorknob tightly without turning around. "I'm a person, not a contract." And with those words, she left, leaving Nathaniel alone with a heavy chest and a disturbing certainty. That woman, so simple and yet so full of integrity, was the only one capable of freeing him from the trap left by his grandfather. And without him knowing it yet, also the only one capable of breaking down all his defenses. As she walked quickly down the hallway, her eyes brimming with tears, she kept repeating to herself that she would never accept such a proposal, but deep down, a seed had been planted, and she feared that one day it might grow. Valentina left the meeting room with her heart racing, crossing the hotel's silent corridors as if fleeing from something she couldn't name. Nathaniel's words echoed in her mind, mixing with the wounded pride and the silent fear she had harbored in her chest for years. "I'm a person, not a contract." She repeated it to herself like a mantra as the elevator slowly descended to the ground floor. But, as life loves to mock those who swear they are certain, fate was preparing its cruelest move. 2 days later, at Charleston Public Hospital, Valentina tightly held her mother's frail hand as the doctor, in a spotless white coat and holding a cold clipboard, gave her the news that made her stagger. "Her condition has worsened, Miss Reyes. We need to operate as soon as possible, or we can't guarantee her recovery." Valentina squeezed her mother's hand even more, who, even lying in bed, breathed with difficulty and tried to smile to comfort her. "But how much does it cost?" she asked with a trembling voice, even though she already knew she couldn't afford it. The doctor sighed, looking down before answering. "Around $50,000. That amount hit like a punch. 50,000. An impossible fortune for someone who earned barely above minimum wage cleaning hotel rooms. We don't have that kind of money," she murmured, feeling the world spin. The doctor just nodded, leaving them alone in the sterile room, where the smell of antiseptic seemed stronger than the air itself. Valentina sat beside her mother, fighting back tears. "You heard him. Mama, I don't know what to do." Maria Reyes squeezed her daughter's hand with what little strength she had left. "You always find a way, Val, always." But for the first time, Valentina wasn't sure of that. That night, as she walked alone down the poorly lit street of her neighborhood, Charleston's cold wind cutting through her thin brown skin, she stopped under a rusty streetlight and, looking up at the overcast sky, whispered, "God, give me a way out." And then, like an echo, Nathaniel's proposal invaded her mind, more vivid than ever. The next morning, as she folded pristine white sheets in the hotel laundry room, she looked at her old, scratched phone on the counter. Her hand hesitated for what felt like eternal seconds until, holding her breath, she typed, "We need to talk." The reply came quickly, as if he had been waiting. "Today, meeting room, 2 p.m. At 2 o'clock, Valentina entered that same room again, her heart pounding so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. Nathaniel was there, standing by the glass window overlooking the hotel's inner garden. He wore a flawless dark grey suit, but the slightly loosened tie and subtle dark circles under his eyes revealed that he hadn't slept well either. When she entered, he turned slowly. "Valentina," she took a deep breath, nervously running her hand over her uniform. I thought about what you said." Nate kept his eyes fixed on her without interrupting. "My mother needs surgery. I can't afford it. I accept." He furrowed his brow slightly, as if he couldn't believe that this proud woman had given in, but she continued with a firm voice, even though her heart was shattered, "but with one condition. As soon as the contract ends, as soon as you get what you want, I disappear from your life. No complications." Nathaniel stayed silent for a few seconds before slowly nodding. "Agreed." Valentina felt her legs weaken but stayed upright. "And about the papers?" she asked. He walked over to the folder on the table and opened it, showing the documents. "My lawyer prepared everything. We'll sign at the courthouse tomorrow. No ceremony, no photos. Just what's necessary." She only nodded, feeling as if she weren't signing a contract, but her very soul. The next morning, in a cold and impersonal room at the city courthouse, Valentina, wearing a simple light blue dress she used for Sunday church, and Nate, in a dark suit, signed the documents. There were no flowers, no music, no kisses, just two signatures and the dry sound of the official stamp. "Congratulations. You are now legally married," announced the courthouse clerk, without even looking up. Valentina looked at her left hand, where now a thin and discreet ring gleamed, placed there as a symbol of an agreement, not of love. Nathaniel extended his hand to her, an automatic gesture. "It's done. It's done." She shook his hand briefly, her fingers cold and trembling, then turned and left through the door before the tears could betray her dignity. Across town, Charleston's elite exploded with rumors and scandal as soon as the news leaked. Nathaniel Ellison got married. To who? A maid? He's lost his mind. While sharp tongues ran wild through tea rooms and exclusive clubs, Nathaniel, back at his mansion, stared at the ring on his finger and murmured to himself, "Now it's done." And Valentina, upon returning to the small apartment where her mother rested, held her hand tightly and for the first time in a long time whispered, "Everything's going to be okay, Mama, I promise." But deep down, she didn't know if she was telling the truth. The contract was signed, but fate, silent, was already preparing its next moves, and none of them would follow the script they both imagined. The days following the wedding were a whirlwind of rumors and inquisitive looks. The news that Nathaniel Ellison, Charleston's most coveted heir, had married a simple maid spread like wildfire through the elite salons. "Did you see a maid?" whispered the women at elegant brunches, between sips of mimosas and venomous smiles. He was definitely blackmailed. "There's no other explanation," shot the gossip columnists, hungry for scandal. Valentina felt the weight of those judgments with every step she took. She could no longer walk through the hotel corridors without noticing the sideways glances, the muffled whispers among staff, the cynical smiles from guests. Even co-workers who used to exchange pleasantries with her now avoided her or treated her with veiled disdain. "Think you're better than us now, huh?" she heard from a housekeeper as she passed through the break room, carrying a bucket of laundry. Valentina pretended not to hear, but upon reaching the locker room, she couldn't stop a silent tear from running down her cheek. She sat on the narrow bench, rested her elbows on her knees, and buried her face in her hands. "Why did I agree to this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. While she faced the world's judgment, Nathaniel, on the other side of the city, also tasted the bitter flavor of rejection. The company's partners watched him with suspicion. His closest friends advised him to annul the marriage, and even members of his own family treated him with coldness. In a business meeting, one of the shareholders, with a fake smile, commented, "We expected your choice to be more suitable, Nathaniel." He simply raised his icy grey-blue eyes and replied, "My choice is exactly what I wanted it to be." But inside, he was starting to realize that this woman, so discreet and silent, was enduring a pressure infinitely greater than his own. It was on a cold morning, while crossing the hotel lobby, that Nate saw her for the first time after the wedding. Valentina, in uniform, was arranging the flowers of the main arrangement with the same delicacy and attention as always, while two guests, as they passed, let out giggles and whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "That's his wife? Unbelievable." Valentina bit her lip, keeping her posture firm, but Nate saw, even from afar, the moist glint in her honey-brown eyes. Without thinking, he walked over. "Valentina!" She turned, surprised, and he noticed how her expression quickly shifted, from strength to caution, like someone raising an invisible shield. "Mr. Ellison," she responded formally, "you can call me Nate. Now." She looked away, uncomfortable. "That's not necessary." He hesitated, but then, with a sincerity he rarely showed, said, I'm sorry for what you're going through." Valentina raised her eyes, staring at him with a frankness few dared. "No, you're not. You're the one who put me in this position." Her words hit like a perfectly aimed arrow, but Nate didn't flinch. "You're right," he sighed, shoving his hands into his suit pockets. "But I admire how you're handling all this." She frowned slightly, surprised by the confession. "I don't have a choice." He gave a faint smile, admiring that silent strength, that dignity none of those socialites, so used to comfort and flattery, would ever understand. In the days that followed, Nate began to see her with different eyes. She was no longer just the discreet maid or the woman with whom he had made a cold contract. She was someone who, despite all the stares, the judgment and the contempt, kept her head held high and did her job with a dignity he, raised among luxuries, had never learned. Valentina, in turn, tried hard to keep her distance, avoiding confusing the rational arrangement she had accepted with any feeling that might grow from their forced coexistence. But without realizing it, an invisible thread began to stretch between them, bringing them closer, not by obligation, but by mutual admiration, by silent respect, and by something they still did not dare to name. One night, after closing the door of yet another neatly arranged suite, Valentina leaned against the hallway wall, took a deep breath, and, without meaning to, let slip a thought that made her shudder. "He's not what I imagined." And at that same moment, from the balcony of the Ellison mansion, Nate stared at the illuminated city, holding a glass of whiskey, and whispered to himself, "What if?" But he didn't finish the sentence. Not even he knew exactly what he was beginning to feel. The contract had been signed, but emotions, those didn't obey clauses. The days kept passing, but between Valentina and Nathaniel, something silent and uncontrollable began to settle. Small exchanged glances, discreet gestures, a complicity neither dared to admit. Until, on a rainy autumn night, fate decided to take one more step. The Ellison family's charity event, held in the hotel's grand ballroom, gathered Charlestons, elite under crystal chandeliers, white linen-covered tables, and impeccable floral arrangements. Valentina, wearing a simple black dress borrowed from the hotel staff, accompanied Nathaniel as his wife, although she still struggled to accept that title. She kept her straight dark brown hair pinned up in an elegant bun, revealing the delicacy of her dark features and the contained strength in her honey brown eyes. Throughout the dinner, she endured inquisitive looks, venomous whispers, and fake smiles. Nate, for his part, stood by her side, firm, but visibly uncomfortable with the assault of cameras and the social hypocrisy he knew all too well. "Let's go," he said, leaning discreetly to her ear as the photographers sought, every second, a new image of the most talked-about couple in the city. Valentina just nodded. As soon as they left the ballroom and reached the exterior staircase, a light rain began to fall, quickly soaking the white marble and the wide steps. The limousine waited for them across the street, but the path there was infested with photographers who, protected by plastic covers, advanced like hungry predators. "Mr. Ellison, look here, a kiss for the cover," they shouted as the flashes exploded violently. Valentina instinctively shrank, lowering her face to protect herself from the rain and the aggressive lights. Nate, noticing her discomfort, wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her closer like a human shield. "Stay behind me," he murmured. But the photographers insisted, surrounding them, pushing, ignoring all boundaries. "Leave her alone," Nate exclaimed, his voice firm and authoritative. Valentina, her eyes brimming with tears, clutched the fabric of her dress tightly, trying not to falter. The rain now fell harder, leaving her loose hair in soaked strands around her face. Nate glanced at her quickly, and it was at that exact moment that everything changed. On impulse, perhaps to push the photographers away, perhaps to protect Valentina, or simply because he couldn't help it, Nate gently held her face between his cold hands and kissed her. The world seemed to go silent. The rain, the flashes, the shouting, all dissolved in that instant when their lips met. It was an unexpected kiss, loaded with tension, surprise, with something no contract could foresee. Valentina for a second froze, but soon responded so naturally that even she didn't understand. When they pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. The photographers erupted, capturing the moment that would make the front pages of the newspapers the next day. "Get in," Nate ordered the driver, quickly opening the door and helping Valentina inside. Already inside the car, with the windows fogged by the rain and their breathing fast, the silence between them was almost unbearable. Valentina, still with trembling, adjusted her dress and tried to speak, but Nate was faster. "I'm sorry, I didn't plan that." She looked away to the window, where raindrops slid down like small, silent tears. "I know." He ran his hand through his wet hair, frustrated with himself. "It was just to get them off our backs." Valentina let out a brief, humorless laugh. Of course, just that. But inside, her heart pounded at a rhythm she had never felt. And no matter how much she kept telling herself it was just a contract, that she couldn't let herself be carried away, that kiss had undone, in seconds, much of the defenses she had built since the day she signed that paper. On the other side of the seat, Nate also stared fixedly at the rain, without having the courage to face her. But that night, they both knew. Something had changed, and no matter how much they tried to deny it, the silent chemistry between them was beginning to grow, like a storm about to break, inevitable and intense. In the days that followed the kiss, Valentina and Nathaniel could barely look at each other without an invisible current of tension enveloping them. The contract between them remained firm, but what had been born that rainy night could no longer be ignored. However, while the emotional confusion took over them, a silent threat was forming in the shadows. Gregory Ellison, Nate's cousin, was coldly plotting his revenge. Sitting in his luxurious penthouse in downtown Charleston, Gregory, in an impeccable navy blue suit and with a venomous smile, threw the newspaper onto the glass table. The media bought this farce. A marriage for love, he muttered with disdain, while his ice-cold blue eyes gleamed with malice. Next to him, a private investigator handed him a thick dossier. "Here it is, Mr. Ellison, everything you asked for." Gregory opened the envelope, and as he read through the pages, a sly smile spread across his face. "I knew it, nothing but a dirty contract." The evidence was clear. Nathaniel and Valentina's union hadn't started out of love, but as a legal obligation. It was all he needed to invalidate the marriage and finally take over the presidency of the Ellison Empire. But Gregory didn't stop there. As he dug deeper into the investigation, he found something even more devastating: confidential financial records, discreet transfers, and Nathaniel's frequent visits to a psychiatric clinic on the outskirts of Atlanta, Providence. "Clinic?" Gregory murmured, flipping through the documents. "What are you hiding here, dear cousin?" Among the papers, a photo. A woman with a distant look and disheveled grey hair, sitting on a garden bench, wrapped in a worn-out coat. Margaret Ellison, your own mother. Gregory let out a muffled laugh, savoring every second of that discovery. Perfect. This will destroy him. Within days, the press was flooded with scandalous headlines. Nathaniel Ellison hides sick mother in psychiatric clinic. Marriage of convenience, the scam of the century. Magazine covers plastered images of Valentina and Nate side by side under sensationalist titles, painting them as cold conspirators. At the Ellison Grand Hotel, the management's phone wouldn't stop ringing, and the hallways buzzed with whispers. Valentina, upon hearing about the scandal, rushed to Nate's office. She found him alone, sitting in front of the fireplace, his face buried in his hands. That man, always so imposing, so confident, now looked like a wounded boy, crushed by the world's cruelty. She approached, hesitant. "Nate." He slowly raised his face, his grayish-blue eyes filled with a pain she had never seen before. "You read it?" he asked, his voice broken. Valentina nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "Yes." He let out a bitter laugh. "They know everything, even about my mother." Valentina moved closer, kneeling in front of him. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" He looked away, ashamed. "Because no one can know. I can't be the fragile man hiding his mother, committed for years." Valentina held his hands, squeezing them tightly. "That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Nate let a solitary tear fall, quickly wiped away by pride. "Now, Gregory, will use this to destroy me. He'll challenge the marriage, spread that it was all a fraud, and I won't be able to protect you from it." Valentina took a deep breath, as if making the hardest decision of her life. "Leave it to me." Before he could ask what she would do, she had already left, determined. The next morning, Valentina called a press conference at the entrance of the Ellison Grand Hotel. The cloudy sky threatened rain, but the crowd of journalists was already crammed under umbrellas and cameras. Climbing onto the small platform with her light blue uniform still damp from the morning dew, Valentina faced dozens of curious eyes and voices eager for scandal. She took a deep breath and began. "My name is Valentina Reyes. Yes, my marriage to Nathaniel Ellison started as a contract, but not as a fraud. The flashes fired like gunshots. It was an agreement between two desperate people fighting to protect the ones they love." The Fiajge murmurs grew louder, and about his mother. He didn't hide her, he protected her, like any son would. Her words echoed like a stone thrown into a calm lake. "If this is going to destroy my reputation, so be it. But I won't let them destroy the man who gave me the chance to save my mother." Finishing, Valentina stepped down slowly, ignoring the reporters' insistent shouts. On the hotel balcony, hidden behind the curtain, Nathaniel watched. Everything, his chest tight and his eyes filled with tears. At that moment he understood. Valentina wasn't just the woman who had agreed to help him. She was someone who, even wounded, chose to defend him, sacrificing her own peace to protect him. And for the first time he asked himself, how hadn't he seen that before? The scandal had erupted. Both their public images were shattered. But between them, something new was being born, stronger than any contract, and fate, silent, was preparing its next move, more overwhelming than they could ever imagine. The days that followed the press conference were a whirlwind of emotions, headlines, and lawsuits. But while public opinion continued to judge them, and Gregory plotted in the shadows, something silent and powerful was happening between Nathaniel and Valentina. The definitive approach of two hearts that, until recently, protected themselves. Behind walls built by pain, Valentina began to frequent the Ellison mansion not as the stranger who once quietly walked its halls, but as a firm presence by Nate's side. She accompanied him to meetings, advised him on decisions, and in the few moments of peace sat with him on the balcony where they silently watched the days turn into nights. One afternoon, sitting side by side, watching the red sunset over the garden, Nate broke the silence, his voice hoarse, filled with a sincerity he rarely allowed himself. I never thought anyone would do what you did for me. Valentina looked at him, her honey-brown eyes softened, but still marked by the fatigue of so many battles. I just did what I thought was right. He gave a faint smile, running his fingers along the glass of whiskey he had barely touched. You could have let me sink, like everyone else did. She took a deep breath, lightly squeezing his hand, a natural, almost unconscious gesture. I'm not like everyone else, and she really wasn't. But while love silently grew between them, Gregory made his final move. He legally filed against the Ellison family, contesting the validity of the marriage on the grounds of fraud. Attaching to the lawsuit, the documents that proved everything had started as a marriage of convenience. The hearing was set for the following week, and all of Charleston waited anxiously for the outcome that could, once and for all, destroy Nathaniel's reputation and annul the marriage. On the morning of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Journalists squeezed at the doors, flashes fired incessantly, and the judge, a gray-haired man with a stern expression, presided over the session with the seriousness the case demanded. Gregory, seated beside his lawyers, wore a confident and arrogant smile. On the other side, Nate held Valentina's hand tightly, as if for the first time, admitting that he needed support. Gregory's lawyer stood up, walked to the center of the room, and presented the final argument. The marriage was a fraud, a desperate maneuver to maintain control of the Ellison empire. There is no love, no family, only a contract. The judge then looked at Valentina and said in a deep voice, Mrs. Valentina Ellison, do you wish to speak? Valentina slowly stood up, her knees weak but her gaze determined. She walked to the center of the room, staring at everyone watching her as if facing a storm without fear. She stopped, took a deep breath, and, with a firm voice, declared, Yes, it's true that at the beginning our marriage was an arrangement, cold, rational, an exchange of interests. The whispers filled the room, but she continued, lifting her chin with dignity. But what no one here understands is that, over time, what began as an obligation turned into love. She looked at Nathaniel, who, from the bench, couldn't contain his emotion, his eyes brimming with tears. I love Nathaniel Ellison, not for the name, nor for the fortune, but for the man he is, for his strength, and for his vulnerability, for the son who cared for his mother when no one else did, and for the man who gave me the chance to save mine. The room fell silent. Even Gregory, once so confident, now seemed uneasy. Valentina looked at the judge, with tears finally escaping from the corners of her eyes. This marriage is not a fraud. It's real. The judge motioned for her to return to her seat and, after a few tense minutes, delivered the decision, considering the testimony and the absence of evidence that invalidates the expressed feelings. This court upholds the legitimacy of the marriage between Nathaniel Ellison and Valentina Reyes Ellison. The flashes exploded, people murmured in surprise, and Gregory stormed. Out of the room, ignored by everyone, Nathaniel, unable to hold back his emotion any longer, stood up and hugged Valentina tightly, right there in the middle of the courtroom. "I love you," he whispered in her ear, his voice broken by emotion. "Truly, more than I've ever loved anyone." Valentina smiled through her tears, holding him even tighter. "I love you too, Nate. I do." The journalist tried to approach, but at that moment there were only the two of them, sealing the end of a war and the beginning of a love that now no longer needed contracts, nor justifications. But as they left the courthouse together, hand in hand, not caring about the flashes or the headlines, fate still held its last lesson, one that would forever change how they viewed love and life. Months passed since the day they walked out of that courthouse hand in hand, under the incessant flashes of the press and the whispers of a city that, little by little, learned to silence its judgments in the face of the love that blossomed, discreet but indestructible. Now, on a clear spring morning, Nathaniel and Valentina stood once again before each other, but this time not in a cold and impersonal courthouse, nor in a courtroom full of onlookers. They were at Nate's grandmother's old house, a modest and cozy property, surrounded by centuries-old oaks and white fences weathered by time, in a quiet corner of Charleston where haste didn't reach and money didn't define anyone. The garden was decorated with wildflowers picked right there, and the unevenly arranged chairs accommodated the few friends and family members who had truly supported the couple through the entire storm. Valentina slowly descended the porch steps, her simple white dress flowing around her slender body, her straight hair tied in a delicate braid, falling over her right shoulder. She walked toward Nate, who waited for her under an improvised flower arch, wearing a white shirt rolled up to the elbows and beige linen pants, smiling with a lightness that months before she never would have imagined seeing on his face. In the front row, Maria Reyes, recovered from her surgery, with teary eyes and trembling hands, clutching an embroidered handkerchief, watched the scene with a serene and proud smile. Beside her, Mateo, now older, held tightly to their mother's hand, admiring the brother and sister who had chosen each other despite everything. The local judge, a simple man, a family friend, spoke only a few words and made way for Nate and Valentina to say the vows they had prepared. Nate took a deep breath, holding her hands gently, like someone holding something precious and fragile at the same time. "Valentina, at first I thought I needed you to solve a problem, but over time I realized I needed you to live." She smiled, the tears silently streaming down her face, not caring to stop them. "And I thought I was accepting this marriage to save my mother," she said, her voice trembling, "but actually, you saved me." The guests sighed in unison, moved. The judge then made the final gesture and with a smile said, "You may kiss." Nate leaned in gently and kissed her, this time not out of impulse, nor to push away photographers, but with the full certainty that it was love, built day by day in struggle, in overcoming, in surrender. The applause filled the air, and the scent of wildflowers mixed with the sweet aroma of the homemade cake that would be served later, while the children ran across the lawn. At the end of the ceremony, while everyone headed to the small improvised hall, Valentina lingered for a moment, looking at that simple setting, so different from the marble halls and crystal chandeliers of the hotel where she once passed by unnoticed. Nate approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice calm. She smiled, turning slightly to him, and with eyes full of love and certainty replied, "I never dreamed of marrying a billionaire. I just dreamed of being happy. And I learned that love can't be bought. It's built day by day with truth and courage." Nate pulled her even closer, and as the sun set behind the trees, turning the sky and fields golden, they both understood, without needing to say anything else, that they had finally found not just each other, but also the true meaning of love. And as the distant church bells began to ring, softly echoing across the fields, fate, for the first time, grew silent. Satisfied. Did you like this story? I really want to know your opinion. Leave a comment with your rating from 0 to 10, sharing how much this story moved you. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video, share it with those who also love stories of overcoming and true love, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates. Before you go, I've selected another emotional story that will touch your heart even more. See you there.